The blue steel gate slammed shut across my lake road before I even reached the mailbox, and the sound of the locking mechanism echoed across the water like someone had just claimed a piece of my family's history. I stopped my truck on the gravel shoulder and stared through the bars. A brand new electronic scanner blinked green beside the gate, humming softly while a couple in a golf cart tapped plastic access cards against it. The machine beeped. The gate opened. They drove through. My lake. My family's lake. And someone had turned the path my father built into a paid entrance. The smell of fresh-cut metal and hot electrical wiring hung in the air. The new fence posts stood where my old wooden markers had been for more than 30 years, their clean edges cutting into the shoreline like they belonged there. A polished sign was bolted to the gate. Cedar Hollow Community Lake Access. Authorized resident entry only below it, in smaller letters. Access fee required. I grabbed the cold metal frame with my hand and felt the vibration of the gate motor still running. That detail bothered me more than the sign. Someone hadn't just put up a fence. Someone had planned this. My name is Daniel Whitmore, and that lake sits on the 18 acres my father, Earl, spent most of his adult life protecting. He wasn't a wealthy developer or some businessman looking for a private retreat. He was a machinist who worked with his hands, saved every dollar he could, and built that little wooden dock in 1989 because he wanted a place where our family could fish, sit quietly, and remember that land was something you cared for. The dock was still there, barely, but the small wooden sign my father carved by hand was gone. That was the part that hit me. Not the gate, not even the money. The missing sign. Because my father didn't just build things. He marked them. Every fence post, every boundary stake, every piece of lumber had a story behind it. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. The gate, the scanner, the bolts drilled into the posts, the tire tracks from the installation crew pressed deep into the gravel. I wanted facts before anger. That was something my father taught me. Measure twice. React once. A white SUV rolled up behind me, and the window lowered before I heard the door open. Victoria Caldwell stepped out wearing a navy blazer, sunglasses, and the calm expression of someone arriving at a meeting she had already won. "Daniel," she said, "I was wondering when you'd notice." I looked at the gate, then at her. Notice what? That someone installed a toll booth on my property. Her smile barely moved. Let's not use dramatic language. Cedar Hollow has always maintained access to the lake. We're simply formalizing something the community has enjoyed for years. Maintained access. I asked, "You mean collecting money?" She looked toward the scanner. The residents contribute to upkeep. Everyone benefits. That answer bothered me. Not because it was convincing, because it sounded rehearsed. I walked closer to the sign and noticed something scratched into the bottom corner of the metal frame. Underneath the fresh paint, hidden almost completely, was an older marking. A faded wooden plaque outline. The shape matched the sign my father had carved. Victoria followed my eyes. For half a second, her expression changed. Then it disappeared. "We'll send you the updated property agreement," she said. "I think once you review everything, you'll understand." I watched her drive away while the gate closed behind her with another heavy metallic click. A few minutes later, I found a thick envelope wedged under my windshield wiper. Inside was a printed notice from Cedar Hollow Estates HOA. It wasn't an invitation. It was an invoice. Annual Lake Access Assessment. $275. And at the bottom was a line that made my stomach tighten. "Thank you for supporting 14 years of community lake operations." 14 years. I looked back at the gate, the scanner, and the water beyond it. The question was no longer who built the gate. The question was how long they had been collecting money to cross land they never owned. I didn't sleep much that night. The envelope from Cedar Hollow Estates sat on my kitchen table beneath the yellow light above the counter. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind of paper companies use when they want something to feel official before you even read it. Rachel picked it up and looked at the number. $275 just to walk to your own lake. I took the notice back and studied every line. The strange part wasn't the fee. It was the confidence behind it. They weren't asking. They were billing. The next morning, I drove back down the lake road with my camera, a measuring tape, and the original property map I kept in my father's old toolbox. I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something obvious. The gate was still there. The scanner still hummed. But now there was a second detail I hadn't noticed before. A small weatherproof box had been mounted beside the gate, filled with wires, indicator lights, and a keypad. Someone had installed a complete access system, not just a barrier. This wasn't a weekend project. This was infrastructure. I walked the edge of the road slowly, comparing the new fence line with the old markers buried near the tree line. One of the original wooden stakes my father placed decades ago was still there, half covered by grass. The new fence sat several feet inside it. That meant someone had moved the boundary. I took photos and marked the location. Then I drove to the Cedar Hollow HOA office. Victoria Caldwell was already waiting. That was the first thing that bothered me. She wasn't surprised to see me. Her assistant looked up from a computer and said, "Mr. Whitmore, Miss Caldwell has your file ready." My file. Not a conversation. A file. Victoria motioned toward a chair. "Daniel, I understand this feels sudden." Sudden? I placed the invoice on her desk. "You installed a controlled gate on my property." She folded her hands. "The community has maintained access to the lake for years. We are simply bringing the system into compliance." "With what?" She paused. "With community expectations." That answer was polished. Too polished. I asked to see the agreement that gave Cedar Hollow permission to charge residents. Instead of showing me a deed or transfer document, she handed me a packet titled Lake Access Management History. Inside were photographs of neighborhood fishing events, summer gatherings, and cleanup days. Pictures, not ownership records. Victoria pointed at them. "Look at this. The entire neighborhood has used this lake." I looked through the pages carefully. Every photo showed the same thing. People enjoying the water. Nobody owning it. Before I left, I noticed something else on her desk. A stack of identical envelopes. The same thick paper. The same formatting. The same invoice I had received. Except there were dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. I didn't say anything. I just took my copy and walked out. Over the next few days, I started hearing from neighbors. Some were apologetic. Some were uncomfortable. Linda Harper from 2 streets over stopped me while I was checking the shoreline markers. "I thought you knew about the agreement," she said quietly. "What agreement?" She looked toward the lake. "The one where everyone pays for access." I asked her who signed it. She hesitated. "I don't know. We just assumed the HOA handled it." That word stayed with me. Assumed. Because assumptions don't move property lines. Assumptions don't install gates. And assumptions definitely don't create 14 years of invoices. That evening, I opened the HOA packet again and noticed a small line buried at the bottom of one page. Lake Operations Program established, 2010. I stared at the date. 2010, the gate was new. The fees were not. Someone had been running this system long before anyone ever saw that blue steel gate. I started with the ground. That might sound simple, but after years of restoring old farm equipment, I learned something important. People can change stories. They can change paperwork. They can even change signs. But the dirt usually remembers. I called Marcus Bell, a local land surveyor I had known for years. He brought a rolling measuring wheel, a GPS receiver, and a weathered field notebook that looked older than most of the houses in Cedar Hollow. We met at the lake just after sunrise. The water was still. The only sounds were the soft slap of waves against the dock and the crunch of our boots moving through the gravel. Marcus studied the new fence line for almost 10 minutes without saying anything. Finally, he crouched beside one of the posts. "Daniel," he said, brushing away loose soil. This wasn't placed randomly. I stepped closer. The post hole had been dug cleanly through the grass, but underneath the fresh dirt was something older. Concrete. Not a new foundation. An old marker base. Someone had installed the new fence directly over where a previous boundary marker had been. Marcus stood up and looked toward the gate. They didn't just put up a barrier. They replaced a reference point. That sentence stayed with me, because replacing something suggested planning, not confusion. We walked the shoreline with my father's original map spread across the hood of my truck. The paper was faded around the edges, but Earl Whitmore had written notes on everything. The old dock, the maintenance path, the southern boundary near the oak trees. Marcus compared the map with the GPS readings. Then he pulled out a Cedar Hollow community map I had downloaded from their website. The 2 maps showed the same lake, but not the same property. On the HOA map, the shoreline was shaded as a community recreation area. On my father's map, the shoreline remained part of our parcel. Same water, different story. "That's your first real contradiction," Marcus said. I looked back at the gate. The blue metal frame suddenly felt heavier. The HOA wasn't just charging people to use the lake. They had built an entire system around a claim that didn't match the land records. Before we left, Marcus noticed a small metal plate attached underneath the access scanner. It was barely visible unless you were standing close. A serial number, a manufacturer label, and a date. Installed, March 2010. I took a picture. The gate had been built recently, but the access system started 14 years earlier, the same year listed in the HOA packet. I went home and called Linda Harper. I asked her one question. Do you remember when the lake fees started? She thought for a moment. Around 2010, I think. The HOA said they were creating a maintenance fund. Did they ever say they owned the lake? There was silence. No, she finally said. I guess they never actually said that. That answer bothered me more than if she had argued, because it meant people had trusted a story nobody had ever verified. That afternoon, I drove back to the HOA office and asked Victoria for the original lake agreement. This time, she didn't smile. She opened a folder, looked through it, and closed it. The documentation is being reviewed. Reviewed by who? Our legal team. Her tone changed. The friendly neighborhood manager disappeared. Now I was dealing with someone protecting something. I left without arguing. On the drive home, I replayed everything. The moved boundary, the hidden concrete marker, the 2010 access system, the missing agreement. Then I stopped at the lake one more time. Near the gate, partially covered by weeds, I found a small weatherproof utility box connected to the scanner. Inside were old access records. Not just wiring, data storage. A physical record of every person who had entered through that gate. 14 years of access. I closed the box slowly. The question was no longer whether Cedar Hollow had collected money. Now I needed to find out exactly how much they had collected and where it went. I should have known Victoria Caldwell wouldn't sit quietly after I found the access box. People like her don't build systems by accident. They build them because they believe they're untouchable. 3 days after I discovered the records inside that weatherproof box, the lake road changed again. I heard the machines before I saw them. The low growl of diesel engines rolled across the property just after sunrise. When I stepped outside, a construction crew was parked near the shoreline with a skid steer, orange safety cones, and a stack of fresh lumber. The smell of wet soil and diesel exhaust filled the air. A man wearing a Cedar Hollow contractor badge walked toward me holding a clipboard. Morning. We're completing shoreline improvements. I looked behind him. They were installing a new walking path along the edge of my lake. Who authorized this? He pointed toward the paperwork. The HOA. I asked to see the permit. He handed me a copy. The document didn't say they owned the lake. It said they were performing community enhancement work. That wording was careful, almost too careful. I photographed every page, every machine, every tire mark pressed into the dirt. Then I noticed something that made my jaw tighten. The crew had removed the old wooden post near the shoreline. The same kind of marker my father had placed decades ago. Stop moving anything, I said. The foreman looked uncomfortable. Sir, I'm just following the work order. I walked over to where the post had been. The hole was still open. Fresh dirt surrounded old concrete. Someone had pulled out a boundary marker and replaced it with landscaping. I didn't touch anything. I just took pictures. That decision mattered, because an hour later, Victoria sent me an email accusing me of interfering with approved community improvements. She had already written the story before I even responded. That was her skill. She didn't create arguments. She created records. Rachel read the email over my shoulder that night. She's making it look like you're the problem. I nodded. That's exactly what she's doing. The next week got worse. A customer canceled a restoration job at my shop. He told me he heard I was fighting the neighborhood over access to the lake. I almost laughed. Almost. Because I wasn't fighting anyone over a lake. I was fighting over someone charging people to walk across my property. But that wasn't the story anymore. The story was whatever Victoria could convince people to believe first. So I changed my approach. I stopped talking about what I thought. I started documenting what happened. Every conversation, every contractor, every invoice, every vehicle entering the property. I installed 2 small security cameras facing the access road and shoreline. Nothing invasive, just enough to record activity on my own land. I also copied every file from the access box before touching anything else. I didn't know exactly what those records meant yet, but I knew they mattered. Then came the letter. A certified envelope arrived at my house on a Friday afternoon. The paper was heavier than the previous notices. Inside was a formal demand from Cedar Hollow's attorney. It claimed I was disrupting community access, creating confusion among residents, and damaging neighborhood property values. They weren't asking me to remove anything. They were requesting a temporary court order preventing me from restricting lake operations. I read the last paragraph twice. If approved, Cedar Hollow would maintain control of the lake access area while the dispute continued. Rachel looked at me quietly. How long would that take? I folded the letter back into the envelope. Months, maybe longer. That was the moment I understood what Victoria was really doing. She didn't need to prove she owned the lake today. She only needed to keep control of it long enough that everyone forgot to ask. The following Monday morning, I drove down to the shoreline. The blue gate was still locked. The scanner still blinked. But beside it was something new. A temporary sign had been installed overnight. Cedar Hollow Lake Access Management Area. Underneath was a smaller notice. Unauthorized interference will be documented. They weren't just collecting fees anymore. They were building a public record that I was the obstacle. And then I saw the construction crew return with a new shipment of materials. The next phase wasn't maintenance. They were preparing to expand the access path farther onto my shoreline. The first thing I lost was not the lake. It was the way people looked at me. For 20 years, my name meant something in Cedar Hollow. If someone needed a machine repaired, a tractor engine rebuilt, or an old piece of equipment brought back to life, they called my shop. Whitmore Restoration. A place where people trusted my word. Then Victoria Caldwell changed the story. She didn't tell people I was defending my property. She told them I was blocking theirs. The neighborhood meeting was held in the Cedar Hollow clubhouse on a Thursday night. I stood near the back while Victoria presented a slideshow on a large television screen. Pictures of families fishing, kids sitting on the dock, neighbors gathering by the water. She never once showed the gate, never showed the invoices, never showed the construction crew digging into my shoreline. This lake has been part of our community for 14 years, she said. The room nodded. 14 years. That number kept appearing everywhere. Like repetition could turn it into ownership. Then Victoria showed a picture of the blue gate. Our access system protects this shared resource. Shared resource. Those words landed harder than I expected. Because suddenly, I wasn't the owner defending land. I was the person standing in the way of something everyone thought they loved. After the meeting, two neighbors who had known my family for years avoided eye contact. One man I had repaired a mower for last summer walked past me and said quietly, "Dan, maybe just let them manage it. It's easier." Easier. That word followed me home. Because he wasn't wrong. Fighting was expensive, and Victoria knew exactly how expensive. The next week, I lost one of my biggest restoration contracts. A ranch owner outside town called me and apologized. I heard there's some legal dispute with the neighborhood. There is, I said. He sighed. My wife doesn't want the business involved in controversy. That one hurt. Not because I blamed him. Because I understood. A reputation can disappear faster than it takes to build one. Then the court notice arrived. Cedar Hollow had been granted temporary authority to maintain access operations while the dispute moved forward. Temporary. That word sounds harmless until it changes your daily life. The next morning, I drove down to the lake. The blue gate opened for Cedar Hollow residents. It stayed locked for me. My own road had become a controlled entrance. The dock where my father taught me to fish sat empty behind the fence. The old wood was weathered from years of sun and rain, but it was still standing. A part of my family I could see but couldn't reach. Rachel stood beside me quietly. I hate seeing this. I looked at the gate. So do I. For the first time since this started, I wondered if I had made the wrong choice. Maybe I should have ignored the fee. Maybe I should have negotiated. Maybe protecting the truth wasn't worth losing everything attached to it. Then I remembered something. Victoria's victory depended on one thing. Everyone believing the same story. But stories leave footprints. That afternoon, I went back through every picture and video I had taken since the beginning. The gate, the scanner, the invoices, the shoreline work, the contractor vehicles. I noticed something I had missed before. A timestamp. Every access system photo I had taken showed the same installation label. March 2010. But the construction permits for the new gate were dated this year. The gate was new. The system wasn't. I opened the HOA invoice again. 14 years of lake operations. Then I looked at the temporary court paperwork. Cedar Hollow claimed they had always managed the access area. Always. That word bothered me. Because if they had truly always controlled it, why did they need to build a brand new gate? I drove back to the lake after sunset. The scanner light blinked in the darkness. Green. Waiting. I stood there watching it. And for the first time in weeks, I realized something important. Victoria hadn't hidden the past. She had accidentally preserved it. I stopped looking at the blue gate as a barrier. I started looking at it as a machine. Machines tell the truth. They have serial numbers, installation dates, maintenance records. They don't care who smiles at a neighborhood meeting or who gives the better speech. The next morning, I called Marcus Bell. Remember that access box? I asked. Yeah. I think we need to look at it differently. We met at the lake before sunrise. The air was cool, and a thin layer of mist hovered over the water. The gate's scanner blinked in the darkness, sending that same quiet green light across the gravel. Marcus brought his equipment. I brought copies of everything I had collected. The original 1989 property map, the HOA lake access packet, the invoice showing 14 years of operations, the photos of the gate installation label. We spread everything across the hood of my truck. Marcus looked at the dates. Then he looked at the gate. March 2010, he said. I nodded. Exactly. He opened the HOA packet. Lake Operations Program established, 2010. Same year. Same month. But the problem was what came next. The new gate permit from Cedar Hollow was dated this year. Marcus tapped the papers. They didn't install lake access in 2024. He looked at the scanner. They upgraded something that already existed. That was the first crack. Not proof of everything, but proof that the story Victoria was telling had missing pieces. We opened the access box carefully. I had already photographed the outside before touching anything. I documented every wire, every label, every connection. Inside was a small data module attached to the scanner system. Not the original 14-year record, just the current storage device, but enough to tell us something important. The system had been upgraded multiple times. 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013. Someone had been maintaining this operation for years. Not casually, professionally. Marcus shook his head. Daniel, this isn't a neighborhood key box. This is a managed access system. I looked through the old photos on my phone. The faded sign outline, the moved boundary marker, the contractor removing the shoreline post. Everything connected. Not because one piece solved the mystery, because every piece pointed in the same direction. Someone had been building control over time. That afternoon, I called Linda Harper again. This time I asked something different. Do you remember getting lake fee notices before the gate was installed? She was quiet. Then she said, yes. How long? I don't know. Years. Did the notices say HOA dues? No, she paused. They were separate. That mattered. Because the fee wasn't hidden inside normal community expenses. It was its own program, its own stream of money, its own system. I wrote everything down. Then I made copies. 3 copies of every photo. 2 copies of every invoice. 1 encrypted drive stored away from my house. I had spent my whole life fixing machines, and I knew one rule applied everywhere. If something important can break, duplicate it before it does. The next morning, I walked into the county records office with a folder under my arm. I didn't file a lawsuit. Not yet. I didn't make accusations. I didn't announce what I found. I submitted a formal request for a review of the lake access operation, including property boundaries, access records, and financial reporting connected to the program. Quietly, carefully, the way you handle something valuable. Later that day, Victoria sent a message to the neighborhood group saying Cedar Hollow remained fully confident in its legal position. She was still smiling, still certain. She thought I was fighting over a gate. She didn't realize I had stopped looking at the gate. I was looking at everything that built it. The county inspection was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. I arrived 20 minutes early. Not because I was nervous, because I had learned something about people like Victoria Caldwell. They were always prepared for the room they expected to enter. They were rarely prepared for the room that actually existed. The meeting took place inside a small county conference room with beige walls, fluorescent lights, and a long wooden table covered with folders. Nothing about it looked dramatic. That was exactly why I liked it. No speeches, no neighborhood politics, just records. Victoria arrived wearing the same calm expression she had worn from the beginning. Her attorney carried a leather folder. Her HOA manager carried a laptop. They looked organized, confident, like this was just another problem they were about to manage. The county reviewer, A woman named Susan Miller placed my request documents in front of her. We're here to review the lake access operation, property boundaries, and related records, she said. Victoria smiled politely. Of course. We welcome transparency. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I opened my folder. I placed 3 items on the table. The 1989 property map. The photo of the original shoreline marker. The picture of the gate installation label. March 2010. Victoria glanced at them, then looked away. A small movement. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. The same woman who had prepared a public campaign around certainty had just looked uncomfortable for the first time. Susan studied the documents. Ms. Caldwell, can you explain the origin of the lake access program? Victoria folded her hands. Certainly. Cedar Hollow has maintained access to the lake for over 14 years. Residents have always understood this as a community amenity. Always. There was that word again. I watched Susan write it down. Victoria continued. The access fees support maintenance, safety improvements, and preservation. Do you have documentation showing Cedar Hollow owns the lake access area? Susan asked. The room went quiet. Victoria's attorney shifted in his chair. Then Victoria answered. We have records showing continuous management and resident use. Not ownership. Management. A careful answer. A lawyer-approved answer. I could feel the entire room narrowing. But I wasn't there to win the argument yet. I was there to let her explain her own version. Susan looked at the laptop. Do you have financial records for the access fees? Victoria nodded. Of course. Her manager turned the screen around. A spreadsheet appeared. Year after year. Lake access program. Revenue. Expenses. 14 years of entries. There it was. The thing Victoria believed protected her. The same thing I had been searching for. She pointed toward the screen. This demonstrates the community has supported this program for years. I looked at the numbers. Then at Susan. Can we verify whether these funds were collected specifically as lake access fees? Victoria answered before Susan could. Yes, those are lake access payments. The words landed softly, almost casually, but they landed. Because the invoices, the separate notices, the resident statements, everything connected. Victoria thought she was proving the program existed. She didn't realize she was proving how deliberate it had been. Susan continued reviewing the records. Then she asked one more question. When Cedar Hollow began collecting these fees in 2010, who authorized the program? Victoria looked confident again. The HOA board approved it. Do you have the authorization document? A pause. Small, but real. Victoria opened her folder. I believe so. She removed a paper and placed it on the table. The document had a board signature section, a date, a description of the lake program. Susan examined it. Then she looked up. Ms. Caldwell, this document states the HOA was establishing management access. Victoria nodded. Yes. Not ownership. Another silence. Victoria's expression tightened. For the first time, she looked less like someone defending a system and more like someone realizing the system had a weak point. Then she made the mistake. She leaned forward and said, ownership was never the issue. We have always managed access because the Whitmore property allowed us to operate it. Allowed. Past tense. A permission, not a transfer. Not ownership. The county recorder beside Susan immediately wrote something down. The room went still. I looked at the notes. The documents. The recording device on the table. The statement now preserved forever. Victoria still thought she had cornered me. She thought she had proven 14 years of control. But she had just confirmed the one thing I needed her to say. I closed my folder. And for the first time since the gate went up, I felt the weight leave my shoulders. Now I had it. The room didn't change all at once. That would have been easier. There was no dramatic announcement. No sudden confession. Just a slow shift. A few people started reading the papers differently. The same documents Victoria had used as proof of success were now sitting in front of everyone as evidence of something else. The county reviewer, Susan Miller, picked up the first document again. The HOA board approved a lake access management program in 2010, she said. Victoria nodded. Yes. Susan looked down. But this document does not transfer ownership. Victoria leaned forward. We never claimed ownership in that document. Her attorney spoke quickly. The HOA's position is based on long-term community use and maintenance. That was the argument. The same argument they had repeated for years. Use. Maintenance. Assumption. But now it had to survive against records. Susan moved to the next piece of evidence. The property map from 1989, the shoreline markers, the photographs, the original boundary line. The physical markers appear consistent with Mr. Whitmore's property records, she said. Victoria's attorney adjusted his papers. The markers could have changed over time. I expected that. So did Marcus. He placed his survey report on the table. Not dramatically, just calmly. The report showed the old marker locations compared with the current fence line. The numbers were simple. The old boundary, the new fence, the distance between them, 27 feet. A small number, but enough. Enough to show the fence wasn't protecting an existing community area. It was expanding into private land. Susan looked at the measurements again. Then she looked toward Victoria. Who approved this fence placement? Victoria answered carefully. The Access Improvement Project was approved by the board. Based on what property survey? Another pause. This one lasted longer. The answer never came. That was the first moment I saw confidence leave her face. Then came the second piece. The financial records. The 14 years of access payments. The spreadsheet that had once looked like proof of community support now told a different story. Year after year. Separate lake access charges. Separate revenue. Separate tracking. Susan pointed to the screen. These payments were not HOA dues. No, Victoria said. They were program fees. Exactly. The words she had used herself. The same words printed on the invoices. The same invoices that had been left on my windshield. The same invoices residents had been receiving for 14 years. The room became quieter. Because everyone understood the difference. A community can maintain something it owns. But charging people separately to access something you do not own is something else. Victoria tried one more defense. Residents knew what they were paying for. They supported it. Linda Harper, sitting behind me, spoke for the first time. They supported the lake, she said. Everyone looked back. Not because we knew there was a question about ownership. That sentence changed the room. Because it separated the people from the system. The residents weren't the problem. They had trusted the people managing it. The final piece came from the access system records. The installation upgrades. 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013. The timeline matched the financial records. The HOA hadn't simply maintained access. They had built a 14-year operation around it. The gate, the scanner, the invoices, the removed markers, the construction. Every piece pointed back to the same decision. Control first. Ownership never. Susan closed the folder in front of her. Based on the evidence presented today, Cedar Hollow Estates does not have documented authority to collect access fees or control entry onto the Whitmore property. Victoria sat still. No argument. No interruption. Just silence. The county issued an immediate enforcement order. Cedar Hollow was required to stop collecting lake access fees and suspend all unauthorized control of the property, pending further review. Outside the building, I saw the same blue gate reflected in my truck window. The thing that had made me feel powerless weeks earlier was still standing. But now it meant something different. Because everyone finally saw what it really was. The first thing they removed was the sign. Not the gate. Not yet. The county order gave Cedar Hollow a deadline to stop all unauthorized lake operations, and the HOA followed the instructions carefully. The access fees disappeared from the monthly statements. The online payment page went offline. The community notices about lake access management were taken down, but the blue gate stayed. For a few days, it stood there quietly at the end of my road, a reminder of everything that had happened. Then, early one Saturday morning, I heard the sound I had been waiting for. Metal tools, not construction equipment, not another crew coming onto my property. A small county supervised team removing what never belonged there. The bolts came loose one by one. The same gate that had locked me out was lifted away and loaded onto a trailer. I stood beside the gravel road with Rachel watching. Neither of us said much. After months of arguments, paperwork, and pressure, the silence felt strange, almost too quiet. When the last piece of steel disappeared, I could see the old road again. The same road my father drove down thousands of times. The same road where he taught me how to check fence lines and repair broken equipment. A few weeks later, the shoreline repairs began. Not because someone wanted to create a community attraction. Because the land needed care. The damaged area where contractors had moved soil was restored. The old boundary markers were placed back where they belonged after verification. The missing wooden sign my father carved was rebuilt using a photograph I found in an old family album. It wasn't exactly the same. The original had decades of weather in the grain, but it carried the same words. Whitmore Lake. Linda Harper stopped by while we were finishing the dock repairs. She looked toward the water. "I owe you an apology," she said. I shook my head. "You trusted what you were told." She nodded. "That's the part that bothers me." A lot of people in Cedar Hollow felt the same way. The residents weren't angry about losing a shortcut to the lake. They were angry that nobody had ever told them the truth. The HOA board changed after the review. Victoria Caldwell stepped down as president while the financial review continued. The issue wasn't that she cared about the neighborhood. It was that she had crossed the line between managing a community and controlling something that wasn't hers. The final accounting showed the lake access fees had been improperly collected, and eligible residents received refunds from the recovered funds. Not millions, not some dramatic fortune, just money that never should have been taken. That mattered, because justice wasn't about destroying someone. It was about putting things back where they belonged. My restoration shop recovered too. The same customers who had been unsure before started coming back. One ranch owner who canceled a contract months earlier returned and shook my hand. "I should have asked more questions," he said. I understood. Most people don't look deeper until they have a reason. The lake became quieter after that. No scanner, no access cards, no blinking green light waiting for permission. One evening, months after everything ended, I walked down the gravel path with my father's old toolbox in my hand. The dock boards creaked under my boots. The water moved gently against the wood. I stopped at the entrance and looked back. The blue gate was gone. In its place was open space, the kind that had been there before anyone decided they could put a price on it. I reached the end of the dock and touched the new wooden sign. The lake didn't feel taken back. It felt returned. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like home again.